That night felt colder than usual, though the windows were closed and the lights were dim, just the way she liked when she tucked me into bed. I remember the way her hands brushed the hair from my forehead, gentle and practiced, the way mothers do when they've done it 1,000 times before. But that night, her touch lingered. Her fingers trembled just a little, and when I looked up, her eyes weren't on me. They were somewhere far away. She smiled when I asked if something was wrong. The kind of smile that hides more than it shows. "Nothing, sweetheart," she said. "Go to sleep." Her voice was soft but not steady. I was young, too young to understand what a cracking heart sounds like, but old enough to sense that something had changed in the way she said goodnight. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, but beneath it, there was something else that didn't belong. A tension, like the air before a storm. She sat beside me for a moment longer, pretending to scroll through her phone, the screen lighting up her face in the half-dark. Her thumb hovered over the glass, not moving, not tapping, just frozen. Then a notification flashed, a faint chime, too quick for me to read. I saw her eyes flick toward the door, her jaw tighten. "Mom," I said. She blinked, smiled again, and locked the phone. "Sleep," she whispered. But even then, I could tell she was listening, not to me, but to something beyond the room. I remember trying to fight sleep because the silence after she left felt heavy. The floor creaked under her steps, slow and uncertain. I heard the faintest sigh before the sound of the hallway light clicking off. For a while, there was nothing. Then, somewhere in the distance, a soft vibration, another message maybe. I didn't think much of it then. It's strange how memory works. Some things fade, faces, smells, the color of walls, but sounds stay. The way her voice lowered on the phone in the evenings, how her laughter grew shorter, her patience thinner. That night, all those little sounds made sense without me knowing why. Earlier that week, she'd been different. She lingered in the kitchen after dinner, staring out the window long after the dishes were done. She'd ask where Dad was, not in anger, just softly, like she already knew the answer. He'd been working late, always working late. I didn't question it. But she had started to. That night, when she came to tuck me in, she looked tired, not from the day, but from carrying a weight no one else could see. Her hands were dry from overwashing, maybe from nervousness, maybe from scrubbing away the smell of doubt. The way she tucked in the blanket felt almost desperate, like she wanted to hold on to something certain, something pure, something that wouldn't lie back. When I rolled over to my side, I saw her reflection in the mirror. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at the small photo on my nightstand, the three of us smiling at the beach, sun in our eyes, salt in our hair. I think she was wondering when that picture stopped being true. Her phone buzzed again, softer this time, a sound she tried to ignore. But she couldn't. Her fingers twitched. She stood up quickly, whispering something like, "I'll be right back," though I was already half asleep. I remember the door closing gently, the sound of her bare feet against the wooden floor. Then silence. Sometimes silence tells more than words ever could. I could feel it, her hesitation, her fear, her need to know. Later, I would realize that's when everything began to unravel. When I think back, I remember how careful she was with love. She never shouted, never cursed, never showed anger the way people do in movies. Her kind of pain was quiet, hidden behind polite smiles and whispered prayers. That night, I imagine her standing outside their bedroom door, listening. Maybe she told herself it was nothing. Maybe she begged herself to believe that. But love has a way of telling on itself. It leaves traces, receipts in pockets, lipstick on collars, new colognes that don't belong. I didn't see any of that then, but she must have. The woman who kissed my forehead that night wasn't the same woman who had done it the night before. Something in her had already broken. When I woke later that night, I saw light spilling under the door, a faint glow from the hallway. I could hear her whispering, maybe crying, though her voice was too low to understand. I called for her once, softly. She didn't answer. I turned toward the window, the moonlight pale across the floor, and for a moment, I imagined her standing there, looking through messages that confirmed her worst fear. But she came back eventually. I pretended to be asleep when she sat on the edge of my bed again. Her breathing was uneven, shallow. She leaned down and kissed my head. Her tears fell, just 2, maybe 3, warm and quick. I didn't open my eyes. Somehow, I knew I wasn't supposed to see her cry. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's going to be okay." But even then, the words sounded like they weren't meant for me. She stayed there a while, staring at nothing, her hand on my blanket like it was an anchor. The seconds stretched, heavy with everything unspoken. I heard her phone buzz one last time. She didn't check it. She just sat still until it stopped. Then she stood up, took a long, deep breath, and walked out. The next morning, the air in the house was different. Sharp, quiet, too neat. My father was in the kitchen, humming, pretending everything was normal. She didn't speak much. Her face was calm, but her eyes weren't. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. I remember thinking she looked older than she did the day before. That night was the first time I realized that silence can scream. I didn't know it then, but while she was putting me to bed, she was saying goodbye to the version of her life she thought was real. And even now, all these years later, when I close my eyes, I can still see her in that dim light, tucking me in, holding herself together with trembling hands, the truth already burning quietly inside her. That was the last night I remember her as just my mother. The next time I saw her, she was something else entirely, a woman who had seen too much, felt too much, and would never sleep the same again. That night didn't end when she left my room. For her, it was just beginning. She stood outside my door for a long time, one hand resting on the handle, the other clutching her phone like it was both a weapon and a wound. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock in the living room. Every second sounded heavier than it should have, like the world itself was waiting for her to move. She didn't want to believe what she already knew. Denial has a way of protecting you, wrapping you up in excuses that sound almost reasonable. Maybe it's just a colleague. Maybe it's harmless. Maybe I'm overthinking again. She repeated those thoughts like prayers, but each one fell apart before it finished. When she finally walked down the hall, her steps were slow, measured. The floorboards creaked under her weight, small betrayals that made her flinch. The living room was dim, washed in the pale blue light of the television, muted, playing something no one was watching. His phone was on the table, face down, exactly where he had left it earlier that night. She stood there staring at it, heart pounding, breath shallow, caught between fear and fury. She told herself she wouldn't touch it. She told herself she trusted him. But trust has limits, and that night, hers had run out. When she turned the phone over, the screen lit up. A message. Just one line that changed everything. Can't stop thinking about last night. Same time tomorrow. Her hand went numb. The air left her lungs like she'd been punched. She didn't move for a full minute, just stared at the words, the tiny heart emoji that followed, and the name above it. A name she didn't know. Her mind raced backward through every late meeting, every vague excuse, every time he came home smelling of a different perfume, faint but not hers. All the pieces fell into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see. She scrolled. More messages. Photos. Memories that didn't belong to her. The tone of his replies was light, flirty, full of warmth, the kind she hadn't felt from him in months. It was all there, laid out in cruel detail. Proof of a world that existed parallel to hers, one where she wasn't needed, wasn't seen. She tried to stop reading, but she couldn't. Pain has a gravity of its own, and it pulled her deeper with every line. She read about dinner plans, inside jokes, the way he described her, the other woman, as easy to talk to, exciting, a break from everything. That last one cut the deepest. A break from everything. Everything meant her. Their marriage. Their family. Me. She sat down slowly, her knees weak. The sound of her heartbeat filled her ears. Tears came, silent and uncontrollable. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the endless thread of betrayal. She pressed play on a voice note before she could stop herself. The woman's voice filled the room, soft, careless, laughing. It was a sound that didn't belong in their house, but it was there, echoing off the walls like a ghost that refused to leave. That was the moment she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a single, shaking breath that turned into a quiet sob. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from waking me. It's strange, when you discover the truth, the world doesn't explode the way you expect. It just goes quiet. That's what she remembered later, the silence, heavy and endless, pressing against her chest. After a while, she stopped crying. She wiped her face, locked the phone, and sat there staring into the darkness. Anger came next, but it was cold, sharp, focused. She thought about confronting him right there, waking him, demanding answers. But she didn't. She wasn't ready to hear him lie. Instead, she opened the phone again. She went through their photos, their messages, their shared history, the proof of what they had built. Then she compared it to what she had just seen. 2 lives. One built on love, one built on secrets. Her breathing steadied. Her tears dried, leaving salt on her cheeks. She wasn't the kind of woman who destroyed things in rage. She was the kind who gathered herself piece by piece and made decisions quietly. She deleted the messages. Every single one. Not to protect him, but to protect herself, to take back control of something, anything. When she finished, she placed the phone back exactly where it was and stared at it for a long time, as if daring it to buzz again. But it didn't. The house stayed still. She walked toward their bedroom. He was asleep, turned away from her, breathing steady. She stood there in the doorway, watching him, remembering the man she thought he was. The man who once made her laugh just by looking at her. The man she built a life with. Now, all she could see was a stranger lying in her bed. She wanted to shake him awake, to scream, "Why wasn't I enough?" But she didn't. Instead, she walked to the mirror, looked at her reflection, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were swollen, red, but alive with something new, resolve. She crawled into bed beside him without a word. She didn't sleep. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting his breaths. The man she loved was inches away, but he might as well have been on another planet. When his phone buzzed again in the morning, she didn't look this time. She didn't need to. The truth was already written inside her like a scar. When he woke up, he smiled, kissed her forehead, said good morning like everything was normal. She smiled back. That was her revenge, calm, quiet, unreadable. He went to shower. She sat at the edge of the bed, holding her cup of coffee, the warmth doing nothing to ease the cold inside her. She stared at his clothes hanging neatly in the closet, his shoes lined up perfectly, his watch on the nightstand. All symbols of a life built on routine, but routine without honesty meant nothing. When he left for work, she didn't say goodbye. She just nodded. The door closed behind him, and she finally let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She went to my room, watched me sleep for a moment, and smiled faintly. I think that was the first time she decided to survive, not for him, but for me. Later, when I woke, she made breakfast like always. She laughed when I spilled milk, hugged me before school, and said she loved me. Her voice was calm, almost peaceful. But behind her eyes, there was fire, quiet, controlled, burning slow. That night, she didn't wait up for him. She didn't check his phone again. She already knew what she needed to know. And while I slept, dreaming of nothing, she sat by the window with a notebook open, writing something over and over. Just one line, pressed hard into the paper until the ink bled through. He betrayed me once. I'll only let it happen once. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and whispered to herself, tomorrow. That was the night she stopped being a victim. The night she started becoming something else. Morning came quietly, as if the house itself was afraid to make a sound. The sunlight crept across the curtains, soft and hesitant. She was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, the same place she'd been when the night finally gave up its darkness. She had slept maybe an hour. It didn't matter. She felt clear, cold, certain. He stirred beside her, stretching, yawning, the ordinary movements of an ordinary man. He kissed her shoulder like nothing had happened, like his world hadn't already been exposed in the glow of a phone screen. His lips touched her skin, and she flinched. He didn't notice. He talked about work, deadlines, traffic. The smell of his aftershave filled the room, the one he only used when he went out in the evenings. She watched him speak and realized she wasn't listening anymore. Words had lost their meaning. He was just noise now, a familiar voice belonging to a stranger. At breakfast, she cooked like she always did. Eggs, toast, tea. The ritual of normalcy. He sat at the table, reading messages, smiling faintly at his screen. She noticed the same rhythm, the way his thumb moved, quick and secretive, the way he tilted the phone slightly away from her. He laughed once, softly. Something in her broke then, but it didn't show. Her face stayed calm, her voice even. "Who are you texting?" she asked, like she was asking about the weather. He looked up, startled for half a second, then smiled. "Just work." She nodded, wiped her hands on a towel, and walked over. Her tone stayed quiet. "Work doesn't send hearts, does it?" The color drained from his face. The phone froze mid-scroll. He looked at her, confused, then defensive. "What are you talking about?" She didn't answer right away. She pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down, folding her hands neatly on the table. Her silence was heavier than any shout could have been. Finally, she said it. "I saw everything." The words landed between them like a blade. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "It's not what you think." Her eyes didn't move. "It's exactly what I think." He started explaining, excuses, half-truths, soft apologies wrapped in panic. He said things like, it was a mistake, and it didn't mean anything. He leaned forward, searching for the part of her that used to forgive easily. But she wasn't there anymore. She let him talk. She watched him the way you'd watch a stranger rehearsing a story he'd told too many times. When he finished, she just asked, "Why?" He stared at her, blinking, lost for words. "I don't know," he said. It was the only honest thing he'd said all morning. She nodded once, almost to herself. "You don't know. That's worse." He reached for her hand. She pulled it back. "I loved you," she said simply. "I gave you everything. Do you understand that?" He looked away. Shame spread across his face like a shadow. She stood then, slow and deliberate, and began clearing the table. The clink of dishes against porcelain filled the silence. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just moved carefully, as if keeping herself from shattering. When she finally turned back to him, her voice was calm, almost kind. "You can go now." He blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you don't live here anymore." He laughed nervously, as if she were joking. But her eyes didn't move. There was no anger there, only a kind of sad clarity that scared him more than rage ever could. "Please," he said softly. "Let's talk about this." She shook her head. "We just did." He stood, pacing, hands in his hair. "You're overreacting. It was nothing serious. It's you I love." That word, love, hit her like a slap. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw it, the emptiness where her affection used to be. "You don't get to use that word anymore," she said. He froze. She continued, her voice steady. "Love doesn't sneak around. It doesn't lie. It doesn't make a woman doubt her worth. Whatever you had with her, that's not love. That's cowardice." He sat back down, defeated, rubbing his face. The mask was gone now, replaced by something small and frightened. He looked up at her like a man realizing too late what is lost. "I can change," he whispered. "I'll end it. I'll do anything." She studied him for a long moment. Her silence was her answer. I remember standing in the hallway, half hidden behind the wall, watching. I didn't understand every word, but I understood enough. The tone, the cracks in their voices, the way the air in the house felt like it couldn't breathe. She noticed me eventually. Her eyes softened, just for a second. "Go to your room," she said gently. I wanted to stay, to protect her, though I was only a child. But I obeyed. I closed the door and pressed my ear to the wood. The voices inside grew quieter. His pleading, her calm refusals. Then, a long silence. Then the sound of a door closing. A slow, final sound. When I came out later, he was gone. His mug was still on the table, coffee half finished, a ring of cold brown around the rim. The chair was pushed back, crooked, like he'd left in a hurry. She was standing by the window, her hands wrapped around her teacup, eyes fixed on something far away. The light caught her face, pale and calm. There were no tears. Just a strange peace that looked almost like relief. When she finally turned to me, she smiled faintly. "It's just us now," she said. I didn't know what that meant then, but I nodded anyway. She knelt, brushed my hair back, and kissed my forehead. Her lips were warm, steady this time. That night, the house was quieter than ever. No footsteps, no murmurs behind closed doors. Just the sound of wind through the curtains and the slow, rhythmic beat of healing beginning. She tucked me into bed like she always did. For the first time in months, her voice didn't shake. "Sleep well," she whispered. As she turned off the light, I watched her silhouette pause at the doorway. For a brief second, she looked small, but also free. That was the night my mother stopped being broken. The night she walked through the fire and came out untouched by smoke. The door closed behind her softly, and the silence that followed didn't hurt anymore. It felt clean, honest, new. The days after he left passed quietly, as if the house itself was learning how to breathe again. There were no arguments, no footsteps pacing the hall, no murmured phone calls behind closed doors. Just calm, fragile at first, then steady. I remember waking up that first morning to the sound of birds instead of voices. The sunlight felt different, brighter somehow. Mom was already in the kitchen, hair tied up, wearing the same faded blue sweater she used to paint in. There was a softness to her again, though not the same kind she had before. This one was stronger, sharper, the softness that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed you. She poured me milk, made toast, and asked about school like nothing had changed. But everything had. The kitchen smelled of coffee and quiet resolve. Her eyes were tired, but they no longer carried that faraway look. She was present again. She was herself. For a while, I thought she might cry, but she didn't. She hummed under her breath instead, some old song she used to love before everything fell apart. I think she was reminding herself that she could still make music out of silence. At night, she sat by the window, reading or writing, sometimes staring out at the dark as if searching for answers she already knew. I'd watch her from my room, the lamplight soft against her face. She looked peaceful, even when she wasn't. There was a new kind of beauty in her now, the kind that comes after pain, when you've lost everything false and learned to live with only what's real. He called once. I remember her phone lighting up on the table, his name glowing in the dark. She looked at it, didn't answer, then turned the phone face down and went back to stirring her tea. No anger. No sadness. Just decision. That's when I understood what strength looked like, not fighting, not shouting, but choosing peace over chaos. Weeks passed. The house grew lighter. She started painting again. The smell of turpentine and acrylic filled the air, and sometimes she'd smile while she worked, not wide, just a quiet curve of the lips that said, "I'm still here." She never spoke badly about him, not once. When I asked where Dad was, she said, "Somewhere finding himself." It wasn't bitterness, just truth. She didn't want me to hate him. She just wanted me to understand that love can end and life can go on. One evening, she tucked me into bed like she used to, but this time there was something different in her touch, no tremor, no distance. Just warmth. She brushed my hair back and said, "You're safe." I didn't know what she meant then, but later, I realized, she wasn't just talking about me. She was talking about herself too. That night, after she turned off the lights, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, but it was a good quiet, the kind that makes you feel like the world is resetting. I could hear her moving around in the living room. Soft footsteps, a chair creaking, the faint sound of a brush against canvas. When I finally got up and peeked around the corner, I saw her painting. The canvas was half finished, swirls of deep blue and gold, light breaking through darkness. Her face was calm, her eyes focused. She looked free. I didn't say anything. I just stood there watching her, realizing I was seeing someone reborn. Days turned into months. Seasons shifted. The pain faded into something softer, something almost sacred, like a scar you stop hiding. We built new routines. Morning walks. Movie nights. Quiet dinners. Sometimes she'd laugh suddenly, out loud. The kind of laugh that makes you forget everything sad for a moment. Once, I asked her if she ever missed him. She thought for a long time before answering. "I miss who I thought he was," she said. Then she smiled, not bitterly, just with acceptance. "But I don't miss the person he became." That's when I learned the difference between loss and freedom. Years later, when I grew older, I understood what really happened that night. The one where she tucked me in, and her world collapsed quietly down the hall. She could have screamed. She could have broken everything. But instead, she chose silence, the kind that holds power. She chose dignity over destruction. I remember the last time she ever mentioned him. It was my graduation day. We were standing in the kitchen again, sunlight pouring through the window, her hair streaked with grey now, her smile stronger than ever. She handed me a small box. Inside was her old wedding ring. "You don't have to hate love because of me," she said softly. "Just promise you'll know when to walk away." I did promise. Now, years later, whenever I think of her, I don't see the woman who was betrayed. I see the woman who survived it with grace. The one who refused to let pain define her. The one who rebuilt herself from quiet strength and unconditional love. She taught me that betrayal doesn't destroy love, it reveals its limits. And when love reaches its limit, you have a choice: stay broken or start over. She started over. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see her in that dim light from years ago. Tucking me in, smiling faintly, her world trembling behind her eyes but her hands steady. I didn't know then that I was witnessing courage in its purest form. If you asked me today what I remember most, it isn't the fight, or the silence after, or even the man who left. It's her voice that night, whispering through the dark, "It's going to be okay." She was right. It was. She built a life out of ashes, quiet mornings, laughter over tea, peace in small things. And though the past still lives somewhere deep inside her, it doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a story she lived, survived, and left behind. Sometimes, when I visit her now, she still tucks a strand of hair behind my ear like she used to when I was little. And I realize that after everything, that small gesture, that tenderness, survived it all. The night she saw the truth didn't end her story. It began it. Because that night, while she was tucking me into bed, she saw the end of a lie and the beginning of her freedom. And what happened next didn't just shock us, it changed us. I grew up knowing what strength looks like. And she grew into the woman she was always meant to be. That's the memory I carry, not of betrayal, but of rebirth. The night she found out the truth, she lost everything false. And in that loss, she found herself. The shadows she once feared became proof of the light she chose to walk toward. And every time I close my eyes, I still hear her voice, steady and strong, from that night long ago. I never knew heartbreak could sound so quiet, or love could survive in silence. Fade to black.